The roar of the crowd shakes the stone walls of the Colosseum. Sunlight pours onto the arena floor, where sand has been stained red countless times before. But today is different. At the center stands not a gladiator, not a condemned soldier, but a woman. Her white tunic is torn, her wrists bound. She looks upward, not to the gods, but to the thousands of eyes fixed on her. For the Romans, this was not just punishment, it was theater. Ancient Rome prided itself on law, order, and civilization. It built aqueducts, codified rites, and shaped philosophy. Yet the same empire that celebrated beauty and reason delighted in the humiliation and execution of women. Whether accused of adultery, betrayal, or sacrilege, women became symbols of shame. Their deaths turned into public lessons. This wasn't justice, it was domination. Every lash, every beast unleashed, every burial beneath stone sent a chilling message. A woman's body was never her own, so we must ask, how could a society so advanced in politics and art be so merciless in its treatment of women? To answer, we must enter the shadows of Rome, where the most shocking executions revealed not glory, but cruelty. To understand why Rome staged such shocking executions of women, we must first grasp the empire's obsession with punishment as performance. For the Romans, justice was never confined to courtrooms or written laws. It was displayed on stages of stone, under the sun, before the gaze of thousands. Punishment was not private, it was a spectacle, a message written in flesh and blood. The amphitheater was not simply an arena for sport, it was a ritual space where violence became entertainment and execution became a civic lesson. Romans believed fear preserved order. By watching death, the crowd was reminded of the power of the state and the fragility of disobedience. When women were placed at the center of these displays, the shock was magnified. Their suffering symbolized the destruction of impurity, betrayal, or weakness. Executions were staged with the same precision as plays. Costumes, scripts, and even mythological themes were woven into punishments. A woman accused of adultery might be dressed as a mythic traitor before being slain. Another might be forced to reenact the fall of a goddess or queen. The audience wasn't just watching a death, they were watching a story, a warning cloaked in drama. In a patriarchal society, women were expected to embody modesty and obedience. When they broke those roles through alleged adultery, witchcraft, betrayal, or simply defiance, their punishment had to be public. Rome turned their executions into spectacles that inverted the female ideal. The mother became a monster, the wife a traitor, the virgin a heretic. This inversion thrilled the crowd. Seeing women stripped, chained, or paraded before beasts created a contrast so stark it etched fear into the memory of every spectator. A man's execution showed the cost of treason. A woman's execution showed the fragility of all women's place in Roman order. Romans blurred the line between justice and entertainment. Condemnation to the beasts Damnatio and Bestias was not only punishment, but a highlight of public festivals. Crowds cheered as men and women alike were torn apart by lions, bears, or bulls. For women, these deaths were sometimes staged with added cruelty. Pregnant women thrown into arenas, maidens stripped of dignity before their demise. Writers of the time described these events with a mixture of fascination and horror. To them, the amphitheater was proof of Rome's power, its ability to turn even death into organized spectacle. But beneath the grandeur lay something darker, the normalization of cruelty. Why was public punishment so important? Because it worked. Watching another person humiliated and destroyed reinforced the authority of Rome. Citizens left the amphitheater not only entertained, but warned. The sight of a woman executed for adultery discouraged others from breaking vows. The burial of a Vestal Virgin reminded all that even the most sacred could be crushed if they strayed. Women's executions had unique psychological impact. By punishing women, Rome struck at the foundation of family and morality. The message extended beyond the individual victim. This is what will happen to you, your mother, your daughter, your wife, if you defy Rome. What makes this obsession so shocking is the contrast. Rome styled itself as the pinnacle of civilization, builders of aqueducts, libraries, and law codes. Foreigners admired Roman order, discipline, and philosophy, and yet the same people who debated Stoic ethics cheered as women were disemboweled in arenas. This hypocrisy was deliberate. Rome knew that cruelty and culture could coexist, even reinforce one another. By wrapping executions in ritual and story, the empire disguised its brutality as morality. The spectacle was not only tolerated, it was celebrated as a pillar of civic life. But who were these women? What were their supposed crimes? The most shocking executions often began not with treason or rebellion, but with accusations of immorality, adultery, disobedience, impurity. In Rome, morality was weaponized as law. Women who crossed invisible lines of virtue found themselves dragged into the public eye, condemned not for violence but for existing outside patriarchal expectations. To see how morality itself became a death sentence, we must turn to the laws of adultery, the rituals of shame, and the cruel punishments that followed when women dared to defy Rome's strict code of honor. When we imagine executions in Rome, we often think of traitors, rebels, or gladiators who defied the emperor. But for women, the deadliest accusations were not treason or conspiracy, they were moral failings. In Rome, adultery, disobedience, or even suspected promiscuity could bring a woman to trial and ultimately to execution. The punishment was not about the act itself, it was about preserving male honor and enforcing patriarchal control. Under Emperor Augustus, morality became a matter of state policy. His Lex Julia de adulteriis coascendis criminalized adultery and placed women under the constant surveillance of fathers, husbands, and the state. A woman caught in adultery could not only be divorced, but executed. The logic was clear: a wife's body was the property of her husband, and to share it was to dishonor his household. What is most chilling is how this law gave power to men to become executioners. A husband could legally kill his wife if caught in the act within his home. A father could kill his daughter and her lover if he believed she had been sexually unfaithful. No court, no jury, just the swing of a blade justified by law. These killings were often publicized, not hidden. A father executing his daughter could become a civic act of honor, a demonstration of virtue to the community. The shame of adultery was not confined to the woman, it reflected on her entire family. By killing her, the family cleansed itself of dishonor. In a society obsessed with reputation, this was considered justice. The victim's death thus became a performance. Her humiliation was staged so that other women in the community would remember, your body is not yours. It belongs to your father, your husband, and through them, to Rome itself. Ancient historians recorded numerous cases where women accused of adultery were executed. Some were buried alive, others strangled, others cast into rivers weighted with stones. The methods varied, but the message was the same. Adultery was not simply sin, it was treason against male authority. One infamous case is that of Julia the Elder, the daughter of Augustus. Despite her royal status, she was accused of multiple affairs and condemned. Though spared immediate death, she was exiled and starved, a slow execution disguised as banishment. Her punishment sent a chilling message. Not even the emperor's bloodline protected women from Rome's obsession with morality. Executions for adultery were often preceded by rituals of humiliation. Women were stripped, their hair cut short, their clothes torn away. They were paraded through streets before being killed, ensuring the shame outlived the body. The humiliation was as important as the execution itself. Rome wanted to kill not only the woman but her reputation, her memory, her dignity. In some cases, adulteresses were forced into the arena. Dressed in theatrical costumes, they were killed by beasts or executioners before jeering crowds. Their supposed sexual crimes were transformed into grotesque entertainment. The hypocrisy of Rome's morality laws was staggering. Men could sleep with prostitutes, concubines, or slaves without consequence. Their sexual freedom was celebrated as natural. But women were bound by rules so strict that even rumors of infidelity could be fatal. The law was not about morality, it was about control. By punishing women so harshly, Rome reinforced the idea that women's sexuality was dangerous, destabilizing, and in need of constant policing. Executions became warnings, ensuring women stayed within narrow roles of obedience and silence. Beyond personal honor, adultery accusations also became tools of politics. Powerful women, especially those tied to imperial families, were vulnerable to charges of immorality. Rivals used rumors of affairs to eliminate them. Once accused, execution followed swiftly. Messalina, wife of Emperor Claudius, was infamous for her alleged promiscuity. Ancient writers, many hostile, claimed she engaged in endless affairs and even participated in a contest with prostitutes. Whether these stories were truth or propaganda, the outcome was the same. She was executed, her death framed as punishment for immorality. Her fall was less about personal scandal and more about political necessity. Adultery became the weapon used to justify her elimination. What made these trials particularly cruel was that women had almost no legal defense. A man's accusation often carried more weight than a woman's denial. Trials were swift, evidence minimal, verdicts predetermined. A woman's word, no matter how honest, could not outweigh the suspicion of dishonor. Pregnant women accused of adultery faced even harsher outcomes. Their unborn children were treated as evidence of their crime, proof of infidelity. In some cases, women were executed while carrying life within them, their pregnancies erased as part of their punishment. Religion reinforced these brutalities. Roman priests framed adultery as not only a violation of marriage but an offense against the gods. Punishments were described as acts of purification, cleansing the community of moral corruption. By cloaking executions in divine authority, Rome gave cruelty a holy mask. Women paraded to their deaths were not merely criminals, they were scapegoats. Their bodies became vessels through which Rome cleansed itself of sin. But even beyond adultery, women tied to Rome's most sacred institutions faced punishments of unimaginable cruelty. The Vestal Virgins, sworn to chastity in service of the goddess Vesta, were treated as symbols of Rome's purity. And when they broke their vows or were accused of doing so, their punishment shocked even Roman sensibilities. To understand the darkest executions of women in Rome, we must descend into the tombs of the Vestals, where silence and earth became their coffins, and the empire's obsession with purity revealed its most chilling face. Among all women in Rome, none held more symbolic weight than the Vestal Virgins. Chosen as children, sworn to 30 years of chastity, they guarded the sacred flame of Vesta, the fire said to protect Rome itself. They were celebrated, privileged, even revered. Yet with that reverence came a terror unique to their role. If they were accused of breaking their vows, their punishment was unlike any other. They were buried alive. The Vestals were selected between the ages of 6 and 10. Once chosen, they were removed from their families, cloaked in ritual garments, and sworn to serve the goddess for 3 decades. For 30 years their bodies did not belong to them. Their wombs were consecrated to the state, their lives bound to the flicker of a flame. In exchange, they received privileges rare for Roman women: property rights, seats at games, the power to free condemned prisoners with a touch. But these privileges came at a price. Their lives were scrutinized, their purity policed not only by priests, but by the eyes of Rome itself. The vow of chastity was absolute. To break it, or even to be accused, was considered treason against Rome. The logic was chilling. If the Vestals remained pure, the city would prosper. If they sinned, Rome itself was endangered. A Vestal's body was no longer her own. It was the symbolic body of the empire. When a Vestal was accused of violating her vow, her trial was not one of fairness. She could not call witnesses in her defense. Evidence was often rumor, jealousy, or political manipulation. Once condemned, the punishment was swift. Yet Roman law forbade spilling the blood of a Vestal. And so the most horrifying compromise was devised: live burial. The condemned Vestal was led through the city in procession. Crowds gathered in silence. She wore funeral garments, not as a woman alive, but as one already dead. At the Campus Sceleratus, the field of wickedness, a small underground chamber awaited, prepared with a couch, a lamp, bread, water, and milk. She descended into the chamber, and once inside, the entrance was sealed with earth. No blade struck her, no rope tightened. Instead, the soil itself became her executioner. She would die slowly, deprived of air and light, entombed while the city above continued its life. Rome had erased her with ritual precision. The burial was not merely about death, it was about symbolism. A Vestal who had broken her vow could not be executed like a criminal because her body was sacred, and so she was hidden, erased, made to vanish beneath the earth. Her silence was meant to protect Rome's honor, even as her suffering revealed its cruelty. To the people, her death was both terrifying and reassuring. Terrifying because if even the holiest women could fall, anyone could. Reassuring because the punishment proved Rome would stop at nothing to preserve purity. The burial became a grim reminder. No one, not even the sacred, stood above the law of Rome. Historical records name several Vestals condemned. One of the most infamous was Cornelia, chief Vestal, in 91 BCE, accused of unchastity. Despite her protests of innocence, she was buried alive. Ancient writers describe her composure, stepping into the chamber without resistance, declaring her purity until the earth swallowed her. Whether guilty or innocent, her death served Rome's narrative more than it served truth. Another case involved Aemilia, convicted alongside two fellow Vestals in 114 BCE. Rumors of political corruption surrounded the trial, with some historians suggesting the charges were fabricated to remove inconvenient figures. Yet the outcome was the same. The women disappeared into the ground, their suffering buried with them. What makes these executions even more shocking is the double standard. While Vestals were entombed, the men accused of corrupting them were often executed quickly or, if powerful, escaped punishment altogether. The woman bore the weight of Rome's purity. The man, at worst, faced temporary disgrace. The imbalance revealed not justice, but the empire's misogyny cloaked in sacred ritual. The fate of the Vestals illustrates how religion became a tool of control. Their role was wrapped in sanctity, their privileges celebrated. Yet their bodies were never their own. The state used their purity as propaganda, their punishment as performance. When they lived by their vows, they embodied Rome's greatness. When they faltered, they became scapegoats sacrificed to preserve the illusion of divine favor. The burial of Vestals haunted Rome for centuries. Even in later times, when some questioned the justice of such executions, the rituals persisted. They revealed a paradox at the heart of Roman society. The most honored women could also be the most vulnerable. Their elevation made their fall more spectacular, their deaths more meaningful as warnings. While the Vestals represent the extremes of sacred punishment, they were only one side of Rome's cruelty. At the opposite end of society, enslaved women and female performers faced humiliation, not as symbols of purity, but as objects of entertainment. Their executions were no less brutal, but unlike the solemn ritual of the Vestals, they were staged as spectacles of blood, designed to amuse the crowd and remind everyone of their place. To see how the empire's obsession with control extended from temples to arenas, we must step into the lives of women whose deaths became games, slaves, gladiatrices, and victims condemned to beasts. If the Vestal Virgins represented Rome's sacred women, slaves and female performers stood at the opposite end of the spectrum, disposable bodies, stripped of dignity, used for amusement. Their punishments were not cloaked in solemnity, but in spectacle. For them, execution was not a secret burial, it was a public event, staged for maximum humiliation, designed to thrill the crowd and remind Rome of its absolute power. In Rome, enslaved women were property with no legal personhood. Their masters decided their fates, work, marriage, sex, even death. A slave girl accused of theft could be flogged until she collapsed. One who resisted rape might be branded across the face, and when the state demanded a spectacle, slaves were sacrificed in the arena. Enslaved women endured the most degrading deaths because their bodies were not considered sacred like the Vestals. They were not symbols of purity, they were tools. Rome stripped them of humanity twice, first by enslavement, then by turning their deaths into theatre. One of the most infamous punishments for slaves and lower-class women was Damnatio ad Bestias, condemnation to the beasts. Stripped naked or dressed in mythological costumes, women were dragged into amphitheatres where wild animals awaited. Lions, leopards, and even bulls were released, their hunger weaponized as instruments of execution. The crowd roared as flesh met claw, as screams echoed under the Roman sun. It was not just death, it was a performance. Sometimes women were tied to stakes, unable to move as the animals attacked. Other times they were forced to run, prolonging the torment. Every bite, every tear of skin was entertainment. These executions were often staged with deliberate cruelty. Women accused of promiscuity might be dressed as characters from myth's pacifier who, in legend, lusted after a bull, or Medea, the murderous mother. In this way, Rome turned alleged crimes into grotesque theatre. The symbolism was clear. The woman's death was not only punishment but parody. She was made to embody shame before being destroyed. The crowd laughed as much as it gasped, their amusement part of the cruelty. Perhaps the most shocking spectacles were those involving female gladiators, or gladiatrices. Though rare, records confirm their existence. Women trained, armed, and forced into combat for the pleasure of male spectators. They fought each other, sometimes to first blood, sometimes to the death. When they won, the crowd jeered. When they lost, the arena erupted in joy. Their presence scandalized Rome's elite, who saw female combat as unnatural. And so many gladiatrices were eventually condemned, their deaths framed as moral correction. The Emperor Domitian in particular staged female gladiator combats, pitting women against dwarves or animals, turning their suffering into a grotesque sideshow. For Rome, their deaths were a novelty, a way to shock and excite. Even pregnancy did not spare enslaved women. Some were executed while carrying unborn children, their deaths serving as gruesome lessons. The unborn were erased as collateral damage, their potential lives extinguished without ceremony. To Rome, their wombs were not sacred, they were property. Ancient sources mention women paraded into arenas with their infants, forced to watch as their children were killed before they themselves were executed. The cruelty was deliberate. It was not enough to take life. Rome took legacy, lineage, and hope. We must not underestimate the power of the audience in these spectacles. For the Roman people, watching executions was not passive. They jeered, they laughed, they demanded more. The amphitheatre became a mirror of Roman values, discipline through terror, control through humiliation. For women especially, the gaze was suffocating. Stripped naked, chained, forced to fight or die, their deaths were consumed by tens of thousands of eyes. Their shame was as much part of the punishment as their pain. Rome justified these executions as justice punishments for crimes, rebellion, or immorality. But in truth, they were entertainment disguised as law. The crowd craved novelty, and the bodies of women provided it. Their deaths were framed as morality tales, yet they were nothing more than orchestrated cruelty. While enslaved women and gladiatrices suffered the arena, elite women faced a different stage. Their executions were not for mass amusement, but for political theatre. Wives, daughters, and mothers of emperors were eliminated in ways that shocked Rome's elite, proving that no woman, no matter how powerful, was safe. From Messalina to Julia the Elder, imperial women were executed not for crimes of violence, but for perceived betrayals of honor and power. To understand how execution became a weapon of politics, we must step into the palaces of Rome, where silk curtains hid daggers, and the blood of empresses stained marble floors. Rome prided itself on laws and order, but behind the marble facades and imperial decrees, power was brutally personal. Nowhere was this clearer than in the fate of Rome's elite women. Unlike slaves, gladiatrices, or commoners, their punishments were rarely staged in arenas for public amusement. Instead, their executions played out on political stages, where betrayal, rumor, and ambition became death sentences. These women were not punished for theft or rebellion. They were executed because their existence threatened the fragile balance of imperial power. The story begins with Julia the Elder, daughter of Emperor Augustus. As Rome's first imperial princess, her life was meant to embody virtue, fertility, and the stability of the dynasty. Yet her reputation became her undoing. Accused of multiple affairs and extravagant behavior, Julia was charged with adultery, an unforgivable crime under her father's own morality laws. Augustus exiled her to a barren island, cutting her off from family, resources, and comfort. Though not executed immediately, her exile was a slow death. Starved of support, shamed by her father, Julia wasted away. Her execution was disguised as banishment, but the cruelty was deliberate. The empire's future mother was destroyed to preserve the image of moral purity. Perhaps no Roman woman's execution is as infamous as that of Messalina, wife of Emperor Claudius. Ancient sources paint her as a scheming, lustful woman who engaged in endless affairs, including a notorious mock marriage while Claudius was away. Whether these tales were exaggerations or propaganda, they justified her elimination. When news reached Claudius, he ordered her death. Soldiers cornered her in the gardens of Lucullus, where, trembling and unable to face the sword, she attempted to take her own life. Failing, she was stabbed by a guard. Her execution shocked Rome not because of her crimes, but because of her power. Messalina was not just Claudius' wife, she was a threat to rivals and factions who seized the chance to destroy her. Her humiliation reinforced Rome's message. Even empresses could be cast aside like criminals. If Messalina embodied scandal, Agrippina the Younger embodied ambition. Mother of Emperor Nero, she was one of the most powerful women in Roman history, maneuvering her way into politics, alliances, and influence. But her closeness to power also sealed her doom. Nero, threatened by her dominance, plotted her death. Ancient sources tell us of a chilling sequence of failed attempts: poisoned dishes, collapsing ceilings, even a sabotaged boat meant to sink beneath her. Agrippina survived them all until Nero finally ordered her assassination. Soldiers stormed her villa and she was stabbed to death. Agrippina's execution revealed the paranoia of emperors. She had given Rome an emperor, but was punished for trying to wield authority herself. Her death was framed as necessary for stability, but it was nothing more than matricide cloaked in politics. For elite women, accusations were weapons. Unlike lower-class women accused of theft or immorality, imperial women faced charges of conspiracy, adultery, or treason. These accusations were rarely about personal behavior. They were political tools used by rivals to eliminate threats. A whisper of disloyalty could doom an empress. A rumor of infidelity could erase a dynasty. Once accused, the outcome was often inevitable. The emperor, seeking to preserve authority, would sanction the execution, disguising political necessity as moral justice. Roman historians, almost exclusively male, played a role in shaping the narrative. Messalina's promiscuity, Julia's extravagance, Agrippina's ambition, these stories may have been exaggerated, even fabricated. Yet they endured because they fit Rome's narrative. Women in power were dangerous, and their deaths were necessary sacrifices. The truth is likely more complex. These women may have been intelligent, strategic, even revolutionary. But history recorded them as cautionary tales, ensuring their executions served as enduring warnings. Ironically, the execution of powerful women often sent warnings not just to women, but to men. By destroying wives, mothers, and daughters of emperors, Rome reminded ambitious men that proximity to power was dangerous. No alliance was safe, no marriage was secure. If women could be sacrificed, so could the men tied to them. For elite Roman women, power was a trap. They were expected to embody virtue, yet wield influence. Too passive, and they became irrelevant. Too assertive, and they became threats. The same traits praised in men: ambition, strategy, strength, were condemned in women. Their executions revealed the double bind of Rome. Women could be symbols, but never sovereigns. From Julia's exile to Messalina's disgrace and Agrippina's assassination, Rome's political executions were acts of theatre as much as justice. They revealed the empire's fear not just of betrayal, but of women themselves. Yet Rome's cruelty did not end with individuals. Beyond court intrigues and family scandals, the empire turned execution into ritualized spectacle, blending myth, morality, and murder. In its darkest moments, Rome's treatment of women exposed the contradiction at its heart, a civilization that claimed to be eternal, yet relied on blood to sustain its order. To conclude, we must bring together these threads: morality crimes, sacred violations, public spectacles, and political assassinations, and confront the haunting legacy of Rome's most shocking executions of women. The executions of women in ancient Rome tell us far more than the stories of individual victims. They reveal the logic of an empire built on domination, an empire that dressed cruelty as justice, humiliation as morality, and violence as civilization. From the humble slave girl thrown to the beasts, to the Vestal Virgin entombed in silence, to the empress betrayed by her own son, every execution carried a message. And that message was clear. Women's lives were never their own. When we step back and trace the threads, the patterns emerge starkly. Women were executed not only for crimes, but for identities. A slave woman's death entertained the crowd. A Vestal Virgin's burial purified the city. An adulteress's execution restored a man's honor. An empress's assassination preserved political stability. These deaths were not about individual guilt. They were about enforcing control at every level of society. What unites them is humiliation. Whether stripped naked before beasts, paraded through streets, or cast beneath the earth, women were punished in ways designed to erase dignity. Rome did not simply take their lives, it took their voices, their reputations, their humanity. Death was final, but the shame endured, echoing through families, through history, through legend. Rome is often remembered as the cradle of civilization, Its laws shape nations, its architecture still stands, its philosophies echo in universities. Yet beneath the marble and Latin lies a darker truth. This civilization was built on brutality. For all its achievements, Rome was unflinching in its use of violence as a tool of order. The executions of women lay bare that contradiction. The same empire that wrote treatises on virtue starved its princess. The same empire that honored goddesses buried their servants alive. The same empire that praised reason unleashed lions upon the innocent. Civilization and cruelty were not opposites in Rome. They were partners. Why were women such frequent targets of humiliating death? Because in Rome, women represented more than themselves. They embodied family honor, religious purity, and political stability. Their bodies symbolized the empire's values, and thus their punishment carried symbolic weight. To control women was to control Rome. This obsession with symbolism made their deaths powerful performances. A Vestal's burial reassured Rome that the gods were appeased. An adulteress's execution assured husbands that honor could be restored. An empress's assassination reminded rivals that power was fragile. Each execution was theatre, with Rome as the audience and women as unwilling actors. And yet, even in silence, some voices survived. Historians wrote of Julia's exile, of Messalina's downfall, of Agrippina's ambition. Though often twisted, their stories endured, refusing to vanish. In this endurance lies resistance. For every attempt to erase them, history preserved their memory, sometimes as scandal, sometimes as warning, but always as proof that they lived and that Rome feared them enough to destroy them. We must also consider the countless unnamed women, slaves devoured in arenas, commoners buried in shallow graves, voices lost forever. They left no inscriptions, no monuments, yet their suffering was no less real, their deaths no less brutal. To remember them is to confront the empire's darkest legacy. The executions of women in Rome are not distant relics. They echo in modern systems where women's bodies are still policed, where shame is weaponized, where violence is disguised as morality. The Roman Colosseum may stand in ruins, but its logic survives whenever cruelty is justified in the name of order. When we study Rome, we are not only studying the past, we are holding up a mirror. The empire's obsession with humiliating women reflects humanity's oldest instincts to dominate, to control, to silence. If we are unsettled by Rome's cruelty, it is because its shadows are familiar. Picture once more the Colosseum at dusk. The sand lies quiet, the beasts return to cages, the crowd dispersed. Yet the echoes remain. The screams of slaves, the silent prayers of Vestals, the whispered accusations against empresses, they linger in the stone. Rome's monuments survive because they were built of marble, but its stories survive because they were written in blood. The women who died did not choose their fates, but they revealed truths we cannot ignore. That civilization is never as pure as it claims. That cruelty is often disguised as justice. That silence does not erase memory. Their deaths, humiliating and brutal, were meant to destroy. Instead, they endure as warnings. Warnings of what happens when power fears women. Warnings of how far a society will go to preserve its order. Warnings that echo across centuries, asking us not to repeat the same cruelty in new forms. Rome has fallen, but the question remains. When will we finally stop burying women alive, if not in earth, then in silence, in shame, in the erasure of their stories?